I'm Danny Green, responsible for Broadridge's international post-trade business. In recent months, I've been doing a lot of work with the post-trade community in Europe and Asia, understanding the impact of T+1 across the globe. So I'm excited to be part of the webinar today. The purpose of today's 45-minute session is to share insights from our panelists on the current status of industry testing and some of the challenges that we're collectively facing. We'll be asking 3 polling questions, and it'd be great to get your feedback, and we'll share the feedback throughout the session. Also, time permitting, we hope to have some question and answer time at the end. So as we go along, please share any questions you have in the Q&A box provided. Our panelists today are Callum from UBS, Anthony from SIFMA, Rob from TD Securities, and Doug from Broadridge. So thank you very much. So we're going to kick off first of all with a polling question. So Emily, if you'd like to just post out polling question number 1. The question that's coming out is, have you begun your participation in DTC industry testing? Whilst you as attendees answer that, I want to kick off today's panel and first of all ask Doug a question. We're currently in the 7th cycle of industry testing. What's Broadridge seeing in terms of testing activity, and what challenges have clients been experiencing, Doug?
Yes, thank you. Our clients have been actively engaged in the testing pretty much since the testing process started back in late August, but we have seen test participation increase steadily since cycle 1. We've actually had over 3 million trades processed through our T1 test system to date, so firms are actively engaged. We see our clients predominantly testing in the trade entry and settlements functions, followed by clearing, corporate actions, and ID confirmations, and to a somewhat lesser extent so far, segregation. Yeah, DTC has also reported an uptick in testing activity. They've said, and actually they said the initial phases of testing had better participation than the initial phases of T+2 testing in 2017. So across the board, it's an indication that the industry is widely engaged with the testing process. We recently did a survey of our clients, and generally they reported that they're not seeing any technology impediments to meeting the T+1 implementation date. But some of the bigger areas of concern that they reported really related to the ETF create and redeem process and some of the unknowns around that at this time, and the tight timeframes for processing cross-border transactions, particularly with their international clients. Now, however, outside of North America, our international businesses have reported that the international players are really not as focused on T1 testing for their North American trades as we find our clients here in North America are. So.
Thanks for that, Doug. Go for it. I mean, I've certainly seen an uptick, certainly with more activity coming in from the buy side and interest of seeing what they need to test, but also, as you say, the international community saying, okay, this really does have an impact on me that I need to look into. So certainly see kind of a lot more activity coming around on that. We've got the results I can see from our polling coming on that first question, and we can see at the moment it's a 61% are answering yes, that they have actually started their testing, which that's good news for 61%. Knowing that May is looming, I would say, you've got a 39% kind of need to probably start thinking about what their plans are that kind of come ahead of them.
Danny, that's actually a little bit lower than our experiences. We would say our client participation rate right now is 90% or higher. So
yeah. Okay, cool. And just kind of keeping this going along, let's Emily, if you want to provide our polling question number 2, kind of keep this nice and interactive. And whilst that goes out to the group, Anthony, the next question I have is for yourself. with approximately 193 days remaining until the US T+1 go live date in May 2028, do you see any areas of concern with the industry being able to achieve the May date?
Thank you. So with 193 days left into the US transition and 192 days left for Canada and Mexico, who both have announced their move to T1, as well as Europe and the UK, we're looking at a few key areas as we get closer and closer to that key deadline. So one area would be, has to do with the CLS and CLS cutoff times. SIFMA just held a webinar on November 7th, and that can be found on ust1.org, which I can link after this chat. But during that webinar, they provided that they were looking at potentially changing cutoff times, potentially after the May 28th, 2024 deadline. But of course, if adjustments are made, CLS is going to have to ensure that the members' systems and operational processes and liquidity sources can all meet that. And also that the Fed and the Oversight Committee of the 23 central banks also have certainty around that. So very important that those cutoff times are looked at, potentially an adjustment of 30 minutes, 60 minutes, or 90 minutes. So we're currently, reviewing that and seeing how that process evolves. Also, a few other webinars that SIFMA has held. One has to do with SEC Rule 15C6.2. We held that one with Mr. Lance Dial from KNL Gates, where he walked through many of the requirements of 15C6.2 and how firms are going to be able to essentially comply with that rule. So as a reminder quickly, that rule essentially mandates broker-dealers to either enter into written agreements or establish and maintain reasonably designed written policies and procedures to ensure same-day affirmation. And during that webinar, we went through some of the key factors that firms are considering. An additional webinar that we've held that is another issue people are looking at, of course, is what products are in scope for T1. So we held a webinar with ISDA, and they basically went through how securities-based swaps are exempt from T+1. And I'll go into a little more detail about the product scope as well that some people ask me a lot about. So very importantly, Fed settled products are not included in scope. And we're looking at DTC eligible securities minus any key exceptions that are outlined in the final rule. If you analyze the final rule, there is a definition of the term securities, and the SEC does keep that definition very broad. It's in section 3A10 of the Exchange Act. And just a few other key areas that we are looking at has to do with securities, multi-listed securities. So securities that, for example, a firm may purchase in the US and then settle in Europe, or vice versa, execute in Europe and settle in the US. The SEC did issue an exemptive order on this in 1995, and it was basically outlining a three-step process to see if the security should be subject to T+1 or subject to foreign regulations and foreign settlement cycles. So the steps are very quickly, is the security DTC eligible or eligible to be held at a US transfer agent? Is there more than 10% trading volume in the US? And was the security executed or settled in the US? Just two other key areas that we're looking at, of course, is ETFs. One issue with ETFs, of course, is you're going to have a ETF settling T+1, but the underliers will be traded on foreign jurisdictions on different settlement cycles. So you have a mismatch of settlement cycles. Well, to cure this issue, DTC has developed some models, an ETF model with very extensive specs that has to do with submitting a true-up of a collateral cash amount to cover these mismatches. And of course, there's more to come on that. And finally, just a few key things that we're looking at as well. Very importantly, SIFMA does have the Form 150s and 151s, which has to do with prime brokerage cutoff times, and there will be no edits to that, as the prime brokerage time will stay the same. There's also a no action letter out there on prime brokerage, and that also will not be updated. We're going to be updating the T+1 playbook with all these new updates and new areas that we are looking at. So there'll be a new update in the coming weeks that will be very helpful, I think. And that can be found also on ust1.org. So that's kind of the key things we're looking at right now.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And yeah, it does sound like keep an eye out for that updated playbook, because a number of considerations you kind of make from there. We've got before we go into the next question, I can see our polls come back on question number 2, which was around how many cycles of testing people are planning to do. And we can see it's kind of relatively even matched. That less than five cycles of testing is coming about 36%. So that's 0 to 5%. Hopefully there's not too many sitting at 0 there. And then between 6 to 10 cycles of testing is at 31%. And then 16% for 11 to 15 and 17% for greater than 15. See, there's a variation and a fair spread there of how much testing is happening. Rob, first question for you, which is very similar to the question we asked Anthony, but certainly for a Canada process. So you've got one less day left. So it's approximately 192 days remaining until Canada's T1 go live on May 27th. Do you see any areas of concerns with the industry being able to achieve the May date?
Sure. Thanks, Danny. Well, nice to be here with you, as well as SIFMA and Broadridge and my peers and colleagues across on the line. As I'm representing TD Securities on this panel today, it's nice to see that the Canadian markets are leading the way a day earlier than the U.S. And so, really because of the holiday in the U.S. is the factor there, but it's good to be able to kind of say that we're leading the way on that in getting ready for T+1. Last year, probably around this time or so, we made the decision, the Canadian markets made the decision to shift gears with deferring the post-trade modernization implementation until after T+1. And, looking back, it was the right decision, and it's allowed us in the Canadian markets to really focus on T+1. And at TDS, like most, buy-side firms and global firms, we have global teams supporting trading activity in Canada, in the US, in multiple jurisdictions. And this allowed us to really work in tandem across our settlements teams in North America to get ready for, Canada and US going live, within a day of each other. The recently CCMA, which is the Canadian Capital Markets Association, they've not only been proactive in bringing the industry together and having good dialogue across the Canadian markets, but at the end of the summer, they completed an industry survey about the readiness for T+1, and maybe I'll just walk through some of the results that we've been part of from that and have looked at. So the buy side respondents, they are predominantly still in the analysis phase, where sell side and custodians are completing their internal development and getting ready for industry testing in the next couple of months. The survey also reported significant advancement over the past 12 months. And across the industry, we started with planning, then development, and doing some internal testing. So really strong momentum across the Canadian markets to get ready to where we are, in November, and get us live for testing in the next couple of months. And then they also did, as part of their survey, they did a comparison for T+1 with T+2, and they did note more confidence with firms' ability to be ready for T+1 than they were for T+2 at about the same time period to go live, which is a strong result. However, they were less comfortable. The respondents to the survey were less comfortable completing the testing with service providers and vendors. And I think some of those service providers and vendors are still being implemented across the street, and are still getting ready for some of our firms to kind of utilize them for industry testing. At TD, we have really strong matching rates with CDS on CDS across fixed income and equity products. We're able to get high matching rates on T0 and are able to settle on T+1 for a big portion of our trade volumes, which I think goes to show how people are taking this seriously within our client base and also within our own firm to be ready, right? But time will tell as we get ready for the next phase of testing and we get into the early part of next year.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Rob. And Anthony, just back to you as a supplementary question in this is, what are you hearing from firms regarding their readiness for May 28?
Sure. So SIFMA has actually sent out a few surveys regarding readiness and gauging firm readiness. We did one initial one and then a few follow-ups. And maybe I'll just walk through some of what we're hearing. So very importantly, the overwhelming answer is firms are on track to meet the May 28th, 2024 deadline. Firms have stated, they started their industry testing and don't see major issues. And so far, no big concerns were found there. Firms are also relying through their back office service bureau providers to make the necessary changes, updates to achieve T1. And firms have also ramped up their project resources as planned. The view on overall readiness remains consistent. Greater engagement, increased transparency. A few other questions we've asked in these surveys, do you believe your counterparties and third-party providers, including custodians and primary vendors, will also be able to meet the T1 transition? And what we've heard from firms are firms believe that the critical vendors will be ready, and they're looking at a little pushback from Asian clients asking about the T+1 settlement. And really, only the real concern is maybe small institutions. Got to make sure the small institutions and money managers also be able to meet those deadlines and also able to automate as there'll be an increase in automation, of course. And of course, custodian readiness is, of course, important for affirmation as well. And some firms, looking at institutional clients both locally and abroad and how they are dealing with trade allocations and affirmations. And really non-US based buy-side firms who may, have to continue to prepare for the T1 same-day affirmation requirement in 15c6.2. We also asked, what are the key concerns? And it's similar to the things we're looking at. We're looking at 15c6.2. That's going to be, operational increase in, automation and policies and procedures. People are looking at securities lending, MSLA agreements, dual listed securities, multi-listed securities as I've listed, ETFs and EDRs as well. Those are some of the key things that we're looking at. And just a few steps that firms have stated they're looking at, preparing for if there's any increase in fails immediately after the transition. People are looking at, how are they going to be able to quickly contact other broker dealers to work through any fails that may increase. Also make sure that Treasury understands that there could be a higher rate of fails or capital charges and in the days immediately right after T+1, so being ready for that increase in volume, but also being able to tackle exceptions aggressively. And also people looking at fail prevention, fail reporting, and fail management. So, workflow solutions, operational models. And of course, client communication is always key. So that's some of the key findings we've had so far based on the, based on what firms are saying about their readiness. So.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthony. A lot of considerations going on out there. Moving on to our next session, and the first one's for you, Callum. T1 is going to impose tighter processing timelines. Have you added staff in other regions or evening shifts or hours of activities for exception processing, confirmation processing, allocation processing, and affirmation processing? Have you looked at new technology around sourcing? How are you, we know we need to condense all of this. How are you thinking about that, your organization?
Thanks, Danny. And yeah, that was a nice checklist, Anthony, I think for everybody. So very helpful. Thank you. I think the follow the sun model, we've certainly been reviewing that internally. It's good in theory, but I think firms in general, need to consider quite a few different aspects to being able to implement something like that effectively. You'll need to understand the access to the right data around the clock. Are the right internal and external people available around the clock to help resolve issues? And obviously, if you don't have critical mass in a particular location or on a particular shift, you need to be very careful about how reliant you want to be on a small team for what could be potentially critical processes. So I I think they're all considerations, and there's obviously no, one size fits all. Every firm will have to consider what's right for them, given their footprint, the nature of their business, and obviously the how that aligns to their people strategy and their technology capabilities. Certainly at UBS, we are fortunate. We have a very meaningful business and operations presence in every time zone around the world. That gives us quite a bit of optionality around this particular problem and flexibility around our operating model. But right now, we're actually more focused on the technology side of things. So obviously, other than the obvious things like improving right first time and STP rates, we're very focused on building out the right technology and analytics to support being flexible and developing a more agile operating model. So we've been leveraging a lot of the analytics we built internally to support CSDR in Europe and making sure that they will work for our US and Canada flows. We're looking at the workflow tools, to allow us to manage all the various steps in the post-trade lifecycle environment. That could be, client emails, broker emails, trade matching issues, open settlement issues, fails, all of that into a standardized platform and sets of queues that allow us to divert work to teams located across the world and in different time zones as efficiently as possible. And then making sure that we give them as much data as possible to diagnose and action these workflow items. And then crucially, also taking a more scientific approach to how we measure the performance and the client sentiment associated with these teams and what they're doing. So that allows us to drive continuous improvement, makes it easier to identify and react to thematic issues, and it allows us to experiment with different operating models. So for example, somewhat counterintuitively, because I think everybody's been focused on the US end of day in these discussions, but we've actually started an early morning shift for our US aligned India team. So instead of them all coming in, for example, at 8 a.m., they now come in at 4 a.m. Eastern time. And they allow us to get ahead of the day, the depot realignments, setting up, missing client accounts, missing SSIs, and kicking off communication and investigating issues with our affiliates around the world. And we've got very good data, and that's been very successful so far. And we're assessing what else we can move to that shift. We also have an existing nearshore team. They are 1 hour behind New York, so we will be creating a small late shift there to assist with the allocation and affirmation process. And then, we're having ongoing conversations with our clients on the size of that team. But ultimately, my objectives for the team that I've outlined is that it's going to be a dynamic environment when T1 goes live. We can try and model this as best you can, but there's an awful lot of actors involved, and we need to be dynamic and as data driven as possible, and making sure that we can be as agile as possible with our platforms.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, as you say, you've got a benefit already because you've got global teams in place today that you can kind of leverage and then look at. But you're absolutely right. It's that access to data. It's how do you streamline the process. But then it is going to be that how do we dynamically change as we see how this kind of evolves. We talked about the FX side earlier, so where liquidity going to be where it needs to be at the right time of day and so on. So how do you staff and the starting and the concept of kind of starting early. So when you start the day, certainly from a US and a Canadian perspective, you're in a good position to get the day started as much as it's kind of top of day as well. And would you say, are you getting much coming into you from your clients of their getting ready for T+1? Are you seeing much coming into you guys in terms of requests from your clients, just out of interest of how are they changing their processes at all? Or are you just getting ready because you've got so many different clients to be able to meet all of their needs?
Yeah, I mean, there's a broad spread. There's definitely more questions coming in general, and somewhat, making sweeping statement here, but US clients are, as you would probably expect, much more aware of this, and also more aware of the intricacies of the US securities market. It is different to a lot of markets in the rest of the world. Things like affirmations are not necessarily they can be new concepts outside of the US. So us, along with a lot of our peers, are spending a lot of time educating clients on that. We have had lots and lots of sessions with clients to answer their questions. We've got some podcasts going out imminently, and we're now starting to use data to be a little bit more proactive in our outreach, targeting clients that our data tells us may struggle under T1, and to make sure that they do, based on the current data we're seeing, and making sure that they do have plans in place, ahead of May next year.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Callum. And on the affirmation side, sets it up perfectly for our next question. So Rob, back to you. From an affirmation and allocation rates, they're continuing to rise in both the US and Canada. What tools are you deploying to help you meet the new requirements?
Timely. I think, from this standpoint, it's really all about data and client behavior. And so on the data side, that was the first area that we tackled. So we're using T+1 as a way to get more attention on improving our data, and we've had great success in that. And so we've done some ability of adding additional capacity to the team to not just fix the data, but get to the root cause of it, and that's been priority number one. So as we analyze the root cause and really look at supporting the right first time concept to say, well, what is causing that breakage of data? We've deployed some internal technology. We've adjusted some technology that we've had within our existing systems to prevent that rework at settlement. We've also leveraged industry tools like Alert Direct, Match to Instruct. We're putting in place with Broadridge and DTC, and also looking at other vendor enhancements around low net and some of the buyback enhancements to be able to drive it forward. The other side of the affirmations and T+1 is behavior. And so, like Callum kind of talked about, done a lot of outreach with clients, but also we put together a SWAT team internally to do an analysis on really reaching out to clients, and as well as the sales in our own shop across our fixed income and equity platforms to get the feedback, but also to gather data and to put together some analytics on it. And so we ran some analytics on, what are we matching with SSC Net? What are we matching with CTM? How accurate is that data that we're seeing across the board? We're looking at, how much of the allocations are we still getting manually? What are the mediums that we get it on manually? Is it an email? Is it a chat? Is it on Bloomberg? And then doing a deeper dive on that manual allocations, how they come in, and what can we do to drive automation in that place. We've had the good success of deploying some bots within our operations and our settlements teams, and those bots range from automated emails to reanalyzing data that comes in. And we also implement some what we found with some of the more technology enhancements on some of the manual work was UiPath. And so we had a number of capabilities that we did with UiPath to focus on reducing that manual work. Some of it's been deployed, and some is still being tested in that space. And then similar what Callum talked about, the client feedback. Believe it or not, some clients still said, wait, what is this again? And other clients didn't seem as concerned with it, whereas other clients are very aware of it and very proactive with it. So I think still wide band of feedback that we get across the board. But I think in talking to Callum and to other peer banks that we have, it's been a full press on client communication and educating clients through short videos, through to emails being sent out, to dedicated sites within some operation spaces to kind of continue to educate clients. And I think we're going to have to continue that. That'll continue through T+1. You know, when we look at our client breadth and look at the counterparts that we face, this will be continuation of this stuff, you know, throughout T+1.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. We're gonna, just to keep in the spirit of interactivity and being dynamic, we're gonna launch our final polling question, just to you know, to keep us all engaged. And whilst we wait for some answers to come through on that, Callum, I'm just going to come back to you for one more question. How are you preparing to manage the data challenge with Rule 15c6.2?
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Well, a lot of the preparation work that we've already done for T+1 and that we alluded to a little bit earlier in my response actually lends itself very well to 15c6.2. So, you know, we've been building out our analytics to help drive understanding the root cause of fails and issues that we have today. And, you know, and a key component of that and projecting what you know, behaviors today would lead to under T1, particularly on allocations and affirmation timeliness, we've already built to help drive that, and that will, you know, that has really given us the platform to be able to conform to the 15c6.2 requirements. It's really just an extension of that analysis and putting more formal, you know, written supervisory procedures and governance around that. And with specific reference to the rule, there's been an awful lot of discussion internally and externally around it, and I believe some of the conversations have actually really missed the wood for the trees, in my view. You know, there's a lot of focus on allocation and affirmation to timeliness with good reason, but ultimately they're just a means to an end, right? The goal is to settle trades. So, you know, yeah, so we will look at allocation and affirmation timeliness as the rule requires, and we'll do that overall and at a client level. But it's really important to also look at the fail rates for your clients as well. You know, so for example, you know, if we've got a relatively small APAC client and they don't allocate by, say, 7 o'clock, or, you know, they don't affirm by 9 o'clock, but they're consistently settling all of their trades, then honestly, I don't think we're going to, I'm certainly not going to lose too much sleep around it. However, if they do regularly fail trades, then that's a different matter. We have to partner with that client and figure out solutions. And obviously, you know, the affirmation process is a key tool that may assist with that, but there could be other aspects to it as well. So, yeah, so we will absolutely have good processes around this, but settling trades is really the goal here, not allocations and affirmations. And I think it's important that people kind of remember that as they think about how they conform with these rules.
I mean, really good advice.
And obviously, you know, we've alluded to already, we're not waiting till May and for that rule to actually kick in to drive these conversations with clients. So us and our peers are actively engaged. We know where we think clients will struggle. We've got the data to support that already, and we're actively, you know, proactively reaching out to those clients to partner with them between now and May as well.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Callum. And we've got the polls just come through on the rather curveball question that we threw out there into the poll, saying, you know, what is your firms starting, or are you starting to look at whether budget's needed to think about the shortening of settlement cycles even further into kind of T0? And I don't know, to me, there wasn't necessarily a surprise, the response that come back, that the vast majority are kind of saying no. You know, as we're all today on this talk, kind of focusing on shortening the cycle down to T1, and I think there's probably many more considerations at T0, and maybe we will see it that a little bit further away. That, you know, that's kind of, I think the step from when it went from T3 to T2 and to T1, you kind of see a path for it. T0 feels like there's a lot more considerations that kind of need to go into that. So I'm not surprised by the majority that are currently not kind of budgeting or kind of thinking about that. Conversely, on the other hand, 32% are thinking about it, but I guess that kind of comes back to, anything that you do right now today, which is of a real-time nature, and you're looking at processing things that says, if whatever I book today, whether I see reference data issues, whether I see client issues in terms of how they give me their allocations and so on, streamlining that process is only going to kind of improve your overall kind of settlement rates. So yeah, I kind of wasn't that surprised by that. That kind of makes sense to me. Just going to go into a bit of Q&A, and we've had some live questions that have come in that I'd kind of like to pitch to our panel here. First one I'm going to direct to yourself, Anthony. The question that came through that said, as an introducing broker, what do we have to be concerned about regarding ETFs with T+1? Settlements where the settlement mismatch is due to the underlying foreign holdings in them ETFs. So that's a little bit that you touched on earlier. What's your view on that? You did give us a little bit of insight into that a short while ago.
Yeah, sure. So I would say I'm not the expert in the actual models, but I will put the email of the gentleman from DTC in the chat here. So anyone who has questions on the actual model and also how you can test that can reach out to DTCC team. But just in summary, just a quick summary of it, the model is going to allow firms to submit a true up of a collateral cash amount to cover the mismatch of underlying securities that are in these local ETFs that settle on separate settlement cycles, and it's going to move the create redeem process to T0 and allow for settlement of ETFs by T1. This is going to, of course, require firms to post additional capital to ensure the ETFs are created and redeemed on time. But for more really specific specification questions, I will have to send the email in the chat. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks for that, Anthony. Next one, Doug, I'm going to just pose to yourself. Are there any unique considerations or challenges being addressed in the T+1 testing, and things that were kind of less of a concern or not a concern at all when the industry moved to T3 and T2 beforehand? So I'm assuming you was around when we did that, when we did then shortening of the cycles.
I was around when we did from 5 to 3. So yeah. So the change from T3 to T2 is very different than our change now from 2 to 1. For the most part, T2 was accomplished through improvements in workflow and compressing of timelines, so forth. But there's fundamental changes within in the processes now for going to T+1. I mean, first and foremost, in 2017, DTC made no changes. Okay, now in moving to T+1, there are a number of changes in DTC's processing. They've changed the schedule for the night cycle. They've changed the schedule for a number of outputs, and all these have ramifications or implications on our processing and downstream processing and into settlements. The affirmation cutoff primarily is moved from T+1 on noon now to 9 p.m. on trade date. All right, so we've shortened the affirmation cycle dramatically, where that wasn't changed at all on in 2017 when we moved to T+2. So there are a number of systemic changes that need to be addressed, need to be focused on. And the ramifications of those too then extend into, okay, stock loan and stock loan recalls. Can you get your securities that are out on loan back in time to settle your trades, and how are you going to manage that process? There were some, obviously we just had the conversation around ETF creates and redeems and so forth. All right, so these are some of the key areas that really need to be focused on, but it is a very different change than we experienced 6 years ago.
Thanks for that, Doug. And looking at these questions, back to the T0 poll again. So Callum, just a question for you. There's been a lot of chatter about the SEC wanting to quickly make the move to T0. How likely do you think that we would see it in 2025?
Well, look, I mean, I've stopped trying to second guess the SEC, to be honest. But honestly, I think it's extremely unlikely, certainly by 2025, at least. As I think about it, anyway, the cost benefit of moving from T2 to T1, overall makes sense. There may be an asymmetry between how the costs and benefits are distributed across all the market participants, but overall, reducing systemic risk, particularly during volatile markets, is a good thing, and that likely outweighs. I've not seen all the math, but it makes sense. I think that would outweigh the infrastructure investment a lot of us are going through, and the possible increase in the cost of fails and operational risk around, system outages, things like that, and your ability to recover. But overall, I think the overall industry, it will make it safer and better overall. However, when you think about that cost benefit equation, with a move to T0, I think the math changes a bit, in my view anyway. I think infrastructure costs to move to T0 would be a multiple of what it would be to move to T1. Because, a little bit like Doug's response to the questions about thinking about what happened when we moved from T3 to T2. We are making changes to our infrastructure, but we're not fundamental. It's not a fundamental sea change in it. A lot of it is really automating, maybe moving, batch processes to streaming, but we're not fundamentally changing the way the infrastructure works for T1. But I think to move to T2 would be a much more fundamental change across not just the way we manage and settle trading, but you've also got to think about the other markets that support the investment industry as well. So stock lending, repo, collateral funding, and FX that underpins all of that as well. If you think about where T0 has worked well in China with the A-share market and with Stock Connect, those are ID markets. You have to pre-fund your account before you buy. You have to have the inventory in your account prior to a sell order. That's the reason that can operate effectively. But the downside of that is that that A-share market, there is no funding market for those stocks, and it's inefficient and costly. So that that does add to or eat into ultimately investor returns there. And the US securities market moving to T0, if that was not coordinated across stock lending, repo, and collateral movements and FX, it would significantly impact ultimately investor returns, I think. And trying to more deeply integrate all of those markets so they're working in sync is a monumental task, to be honest. So trying to do something like that within a couple of years is, I think, going to be a major challenge. But let's see. I mean, Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I agree with you completely. I think that the 2025 feels like in my perspective, feels like a no. I think we should never say never, and I think we should have it in the considerations of all change that we deliver. But as you've mentioned, there's a lot more questions around funding and so on, and pre-funding and so on. And there's many more questions that we would need to answer than we have for T+1.
Absolutely. And obviously, and if you think about your poll question as well, investing in technologies that would be prerequisites for a T0 environment can also, if you do it thoughtfully, help you whether you're settling T2, T1, or T0. So moving away from batch processes to streaming of data, more analytics, more efficient workflows, all of those things will be must-haves. Probably under T1 and certainly under T0, but will benefit you today. So that's, I would encourage everybody to, think about it that way as well.
Absolutely. Right, Doug, I'm going to get you to take us home with the last question here, and one that is pretty close to my heart. What are we seeing in other jurisdictions in EMEA and in APAC? And what do you think is going to be the next to make a move?
So in the UK, the FCA has established a task force to consider moving to an accelerated settlement cycle and to outline how this move could be implemented. So the initial findings from the FCA's task force are due to be released next month in December of 2023. and they will be issuing a final report with the recommendations later next year. But it's our expectation that they will recommend a move to shortening the settlement. Across Europe, ESMA, the European Securities and Markets Authority, has an open consultation right now that will close on December 15th on the topic of shortening the settlement cycle. ESMA plans to submit their report with their findings to the European Commission sometime in 2024, but there's no formal timeline around that either. And you know, we kind of expect that the Asian markets over time are going to follow suit and shorten as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it just leaves it to me, first of all, to say a huge thank you to our expert panel that we've had today, and you've all shared some great insights. Very much appreciate it. Thank you as a whole to SIFMA for arranging and putting this webinar together. And finally, but very, very importantly, thank you to all of our participants. And we hope that you've found this informative and you've got some good takeaways. Thank you very much for your time.